Hello. A couple of just sort of public service announcements. One is that in this presentation, I mean, we'll see how it goes, but it may be a little long. And what I would ask people is if you have something urgent, something which just cannot wait, feel free to ask a question. But otherwise, in general, try to hold questions till the end, because if we keep getting interrupted, this could take all day. So that would be my request. The second thing is I'm going to have to refer periodically to my notes. I apologize about that. I don't like to do that, but there's too much to cover, and frankly, I can't keep it all in my head. So I'm going to have to do that. All right. Now, the title of this presentation is Alexander Hamilton, the Bricks, and Changing How You Think. Now, we will deal with all of those topics, but I want to say right from the get-go that the final topic, Changing How You Think, is by far the most important. And that will be the underlying subject matter of the entire presentation. Because people have a lot of opinions, people have certain fixed views on what they can do, and it's not just a question of changing your opinion about a particular thing. It's not a question of an opinion. It's a question of changing how you think about certain things, challenging your own axioms, challenging your own almost unconscious beliefs about how things work and what needs to be done. Now, I mean, for instance, you know, I will say to you that Lyndon LaRouche has spoken repeatedly about what he terms the Hamiltonian principle. The Hamiltonian principle as the foundation of the United States, as the foundation of our republic. Now, he does not talk about the Hamiltonian formula, the Hamiltonian economic program. He talks about the Hamiltonian principle. And to try to make that a little bit more concrete for you, we had this period in the 1790s, particularly under the 8 years of the George Washington presidency, in which the full Hamiltonian economic policy was brought into existence. And we will go into that later in the presentation. Later in the 1820s, you had a revival of this sort of an outlook, a similar outlook, similar approach to policy under people like John Quincy Adams, Nicholas Biddle, and others. Then you had what Abraham Lincoln did in the 1860s, the greenback policy and other things. And then you had what Franklin Roosevelt did in the 1930s. Now, I could tell you right off the bat that what was done by Quincy Adams and Biddle and others in the 1820s was significantly different than what Hamilton did. What was done by Lincoln in the 1860s was more than significantly different than what Hamilton did. And what was done by FDR, again, was different. It's not the particulars of the policies. It is the underlying intent, the underlying principle, the underlying battle against an oligarchical system. Now, for instance, right now, we have put up on our website, we have publicized this, that some months ago, Lyndon LaRouche, Mr. LaRouche has written a lot of in-depth analyses and articles on the economic policy, on the strategic crisis. But he also sort of encapsulated the steps that need to be taken right now to deal with this global financial breakdown crisis. And we've called this LaRouche's 4 laws. And I'll just read you a brief description of those 4 laws. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Number 1, the immediate reenactment of the Glass-Steagall Law, which was repealed some years ago. Originally had been enacted under Franklin Roosevelt. Number 1, the immediate reenactment of the Glass-Steagall Law. Number 2, a return to a system of top-down and thoroughly defined national banking as conducted as a national credit system placed under the supervision of the Office of the Treasury Secretary of the United States. Number 3, the purpose of the use of a federal credit system is to generate high trends in improvements of employment with accompanying intention to increase the physical, economic, productivity, and the standard of living of the persons and households of the United States. Number 4, the adoption of a fusion driver crash program in which the essential distinction of man from all lower forms of life in practice is that it presents the means for the perfection of the specifically affirmative aims and needs of human, individual, and social life. Now, that's not a program. Or let me make it a little bit more clear. That's not a formula. What LaRouche is presenting here is not a formula. And the problem with people thinking the way most people think, in terms of challenging how you think, is that when looking at this crisis today, this global crisis, this national economic crisis, this banking crisis, people tend to think in terms of formulas. Let's do this, 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 right? Now, there's 2 problems with that. One is that no fixed formula is going to work. We are not in the same situation today as Roosevelt was in, as Lincoln was in, as Hamilton was in. In fact, right now we have a potentiality which did not even exist for those previous presidencies, which we have the potentiality for a global credit system, as Mike was going through, with the BRICS, of the United States allying with the BRICS in bringing into existence an actual global credit system which will replace financial empire. This was never possible before. And possibly in 1945, but Roosevelt died in 1945. It was not possible for Abraham Lincoln. It was not possible for Alexander Hamilton, because the United States was not in a position to do that, and the world was not such that that could be done. So we're in a different situation, but the Hamiltonian principle is the same. Now, the other problem with people putting forward formulas is that by just sort of adopting a formula, you really don't have to challenge how you think about things like money or economics. Because, look, how do some people think about this? For people who look, there are a lot of people who think the economy is great, right? Because, who knows, they're working for Google, they're making money in investments, blah, blah, blah. But, the majority of Americans are suffering, and the majority of Americans know that there is something radically wrong with the direction we're headed in. But what's the problem with the way a lot of these people, maybe not everyone, what's the problem with the way a lot of these people think about this? They say, well, if we can fix this, if we can fix that, then I could then things could be better for me. And then maybe I'll start making money off of some of my investments. Maybe I'll be able to buy and sell houses. Maybe I'll be able to invest in some stock on Wall Street. We have bankers who are stealing money from us. We have people at J.P. Morgan Chase and Citibank, and back in 2007 it was Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, who were stealing money from us, who we're giving money to with all these government bailouts. Our taxpayer money is going to government bailouts, And if we just stop all this corruption, then we can get back to a normal life, business as usual. Now, that's thinking about it in the wrong way. Because the fact is, what people have thought about economics, the idea that you run an economy based on money, based on investments, based on financial speculation, the way people have been trained to think in the last 30 to 40 years is completely wrong. And unless you are willing to challenge how you think about these things, then you really can't understand what it is we're trying to do, what the Hamiltonian principle really is, and what the actual mission of the United States is in history. So these are some of the things. Now, I'm going to write up on the board 4 questions. This gets to the question of changing how you think. And I'm not going to ask people for answers right now. And I'm not going to try to answer the questions right now, but these are the questions which I would hopefully will get through as this presentation progresses. All right? All right. Hopefully people can read this. Move this forward slightly.
Here, should I move it over a little more? You can
Yes. No trip. No trip. Okay, number 1. I'll put it.
There's better markers by the speaker underneath the television.
Where?
Under your coffee cup. Okay.
Yeah, that one needs something that people are going to be able to see. Maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger. What is sorry, the actual nature of the human species? Now, obviously a big topic. We're not going to try to answer that, but this is a fundamental question. Number 2, what is the actual definition of the term wealth? Number 3, what is the difference between a credit system and a money system? And number 4, do we actually need Wall Street at all? Now, I don't want people to, pipe up with answers right now. But clearly, if I was to ask everyone here, if we had hours to do this, if I was to go around the room and ask everyone here to answer those 4 questions, everybody, I'm sure, would have answers to those 4 questions, right? The only thing I would ask you to consider at this moment is that perhaps the answers you have to those 4 questions are wrong. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm asking you to consider that what you believe in terms of those 4 questions, I'm asking you to consider that possibly you might be wrong about some of these. because this is the question of challenging how we think about these things, right? Now, now this is going to start a little slow. We're going to get into Hamilton. We're going to get into Wall Street. We're going to get into the American system of economics. But I want to start with these first two questions. And again, we can't do justice to them all right here today. But I want to pose certain things to you, okay? Number one, it is at this point, all of the archaeological evidence indicates that the human species has existed for about 2 million years. 2 million years. Who knows? In the future, they may find evidence that it goes back further than that. But there is certainly confirmed archaeological evidence, paleontological evidence of the existence of the human species for 2 million years. There is also existence for the use of fire, confirmed existence for the use of fire by human beings going back at least 1.8 to 1.9 million years ago. Which means essentially that existing evidence indicates that the human species virtually from the very first moment it can be identified in terms of archaeological remains was also engaged in the use of fire. Now, what does that mean? First of all, no animals use fire. Most animals, overwhelming majority of animals and other creatures are terrified of fire. Human beings not only used fire, but discovered the principle of fire, which means that fire was something that could be used to transform nature around them in ways that were beneficial to them and to the species, to the human race, in terms of cooking, heating, other kinds of things. That it's not simply a fire, but a discovery of the use of fire, a discovery of the principle of fire, which set man on a path unlike any other creature in existence. Now, we're not going to get into a whole debate here about DNA and dolphins and monkeys and all this nonsense. The thing to understand is when you look at any other creature, and it doesn't matter, it can be a cockroach, it can be a whale, it doesn't matter. It can be a cow, it can be your favorite little pet dog. Well, dogs are a little different because they've been so much changed by their long relations with human beings. But the fact is that all creatures of whatever form that exist on this planet exist in a fixed relationship with nature. That is, they are dependent on nature for food, etc., and they are incapable of changing that relationship. That is, if you go back thousands of years ago and you find some horse or goat or something, they live in exactly the same way as goats and horses live today. If they're in the wild, they live from generation to generation over hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years. These creatures are incapable of changing their habitat, their existence. But with the discovery of fire, mankind set himself off on a different path, a different pathway of beginning to make discoveries of creative, noetic power, the power of the human mind, to make discoveries such that which led to an increasing intervention into nature, such that man's relationship with nature was not one of being dependent on nature, like other lower beasts, but increasingly changing nature, transforming nature, using nature in ways that led towards increasing human population, higher standard of living, inventions, agriculture, science. For instance, I'll give you there's a period in human history. I'm going to write a few more things up here. I'll just squeeze them in. There's a period in human history called the Paleolithic, which generally is 10,000 to 3,000 BC. That's what, but it actually goes back at least 10,000 years earlier in reality. So you're talking about 20,000 to 3,000 BC. In this period of roughly about 15 to 20,000 years, what you had was the beginnings of agriculture, astronomy, navigation, metallurgy, writing, music, and art. These are profound discoveries, a profound increase in the power of our species over the planet to direct our own future. Look, when I say that one of the things that distinguishes human beings from other forms of, other creatures, is that other creatures are fixed to nature, and the human race is not fixed to nature. There's actually a more profound way to think about this. Even better than thinking about it in that way, which is that the human race is the only race, is the only species. There is no other species, and I challenge you, all of you, to think about this. There is no other species in existence which thinks about the future, which has a concept of the future, right? Cows don't. Dolphins don't. Baboons don't. But a concept of the future, not just tomorrow, not just the next day, but the ability to conceptualize future generations. And through the power of the human mind, in terms of discovering new inventions, metallurgy, bronze, iron, new technologies, new forms of power generation, to consciously take actions which will affect that future, which will enhance that future, which will make for future generations a better world, a better society, a better environment, a better place for our descendants. Only human beings can do that. Now, without dragging this part of the presentation on, what does this have to do with Alexander Hamilton? What does this have to do with the issue of credit, with a credit system? Because a credit system, as it was devised by Alexander Hamilton, is the only economic system coherent with this quality of the human race, of a future orientation, of the development of the physical economy in a deliberate and conscious way, which will increase human productivity, which will increase human power over nature. A credit system makes that conscious, makes that deliberate, that you have an economic system which is designed to help mankind move into that future. Can't force anybody to do everything. You can't plan out every little detail. As the Soviet Union discovered, when they, you know, produced tons of nails and then realized that they didn't have anything to nail them into. You know, you can't have a planned economy in that way. But what you have is an intent, a direction. And this is what a credit system is, as opposed to an oligarchical money system, which is what we live under today. And an oligarchical money system is based on money is magical, it has power in and of itself, and you can spend it on sex, drugs, vacations, boating, restaurants. You know, you can spend it on things which bring you pleasure. That's a money system. Most people today take that for granted. This is how society is. This is what the economy is. And if you're really smart, and if you're really clever, you'll figure out how to take the money you have and invest it in a really cool way such that you can make even more money, right? Not only is that insane, it is anti-human. And in fact, it is suicide. Because if we do that, as Wall Street has been doing, you know, derivatives tradings, futures tradings, options tradings, you know, mortgage-backed securities, all this stuff they've been doing. Money chasing money, chasing money, chasing money. You are creating a gambling casino which will come crashing down. This, you know, a credit system operates, it's not a formula. It's not simply legislation. It starts with conceptualizing that our nation, which is based on this concept of what it means to be human, is going to foster policies which will lead towards greater productivity and a happier future for future generations. And today we have the capability to bring that into existence worldwide with the BRICS, if we can change what's going on in the United States. Now, what we will do right now is go into this question of Hamilton and the American nationalists. But I want to write a name. Oh, here we are. I want to write a name on the board, which some of you probably have heard of, maybe many of you haven't, because, well, let's see. Gouverneur Morris. There's a lot that could be said about him, but this is not really the place to do it. But I'm going to write his name up there. And by the way, his name is Gouverneur Morris. He was not a governor. He was not the governor of anything. This is actually his first name. I want to put his name up on the board. His name will come up several times during the course of the presentation. But I want to put his name up on the board because what follows, the following presentation on Hamilton and on the credit system, I'm going to bookend it, beginning with a quote from Gouverneur Morris, and then I'm going to end with a quote from Gouverneur Morris. Now, the first quote, hopefully all of you will recognize, although you may not realize that he wrote it. Mm-hmm. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. That's the preamble to the United States Constitution. It's written in 1787 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Gouverneur Morris was the author of it. He actually wrote the entire Constitution, but to explain that, they had a committee on style at the end of the Constitutional Convention, in which they had all these parts of the Constitution, you know, and they didn't, you know, it was all written in rough form, and they had voted to adopt all these things, but it was a jumble. And they asked him to put it in some kind of coherent form and then to write it out so it was polished, right? And he did that for the entire Constitution, right? He didn't, you know, what was in the Constitution, the content was what was adopted by the delegates, but he put it into its final polished form. But the preamble, he wrote from scratch. This was his personal contribution. And and what I would just point out to you here is the section to promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. This is future-oriented. It is not about how do we get the British off our backs so that we can make more money in the United States. We're sick and tired of sending our money to London. We're sick and tired of being taxed. Let's get rid of the British so we can keep the money here. That's not what it was about. It was about creating a republic. Creating a republic which would be for the benefit, the general welfare of the population, and the general welfare and benefit of future generations. A direction, an intention for this kind of development. Now, this was immediately followed with the election of George Washington as president in 1788 and his inauguration in 1789. And once Washington was brought into office, Alexander Hamilton devised an economic policy which was, the purpose of which was to put this intention into concrete form, right? To put it in a form in which the nation could move in the direction economically that was intended by, you know, what had come out of the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention. Now, look, I will say that, you know, sort of a slight digression, that, you know, there was at that time, you know, that a lot of what occurred was really the product of a fairly small group of individuals. So if you are sometimes disheartened that there don't seem to be enough of us here, you know, that our movement doesn't seem to be big enough. And we all would always like our movement to be bigger. But I would point out to you that at the time of the American Revolution, the people actively involved in the American Revolution were a minority of the people living in the colonies. At the time of the Constitutional Convention, when they adopted the Constitution, it was by no means certain that the Constitution was going to be ratified by the states. There was enormous opposition to it in some states, including in New York, and Virginia and elsewhere. And in some places, it was ratified by a very small number of votes. In New York, the people who were most responsible for getting the Constitution ratified were Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and a person named Robert Livingston. They were the ones who went to the ratification convention in Poughkeepsie, New York, in 1788, and got the Constitution ratified. At the beginning of that convention, they were a small minority. The majority of delegates were against ratification. But they persevered, and they eventually succeeded in getting New York to ratify it. But around the Washington administration, you had a group of people who you could call the American nationalists, the original American nationalists. That's one name you could give to them. And these were a group, relatively finite group of people who were intensely, personally loyal to George Washington. Many of them had been with Washington at Valley Forge or at Morristown, which was the second winter headquarters during the Revolutionary War. They had sat around the campfires, you know, while soldiers were freezing to death, dying from disease. And they had gone through the worst periods of the Revolution. And this group included Alexander Hamilton, Gouverneur Morris, John Jay, and there were several other people, Livingston and some others, John Marshall actually, and others, who were part of this group. And they didn't always agree on everything. You know, they had a lot of disagreements, but what they shared was an absolute commitment to the creation of a republic, which would overthrow oligarchical values, and which would found a nation based on this concept of progress into the future, of the development of the physical economy. And these people carried it through. After Washington died, he left office in 1797, he died in 1799, things went a little bit off track, but they were brought back on track again later. But these were the people who, in the first period of our country, really established a national credit system, who defined how it would work, and who began to implement it, right? Now, between as I said, Washington was inaugurated in 1789. In the next 18 months, Alexander Hamilton wrote 4 papers. He wrote the report on public credit. Then he wrote the report on a national bank. Then he wrote the report on manufacturers. And then he wrote the opinion on the constitutionality of a national bank. These 4 papers define the outlook, the intention, and the structure of a national credit system. But you can't just look at it in terms of banking. This is what the mistake people always want to make. What did he do in terms of banking? What about banking? What about investments? You can't look at it in just that way. Because, for instance, as I said, these 4 reports, Hamilton's 4 reports, were 1790 to 1791. This may be a little small for people to see, but that's Hamilton's 4 reports: public credit, manufacturing, national bank, etc. Right? But in 1791, all right, down here, I hope people could see it, because this is too small. In 1791, Hamilton also established the Society for, let me make sure I get this right, for the establishment of useful manufacturers. Which is known as the SEUM. And then in 1792, in New York State, this is the same time as these four reports. In 1792 in New York State, you have the creation of the Western Inland Lock and Navigation Company. And the, hopefully people can read this. If not, I apologize. This, the head of this, of the Western, this is a corporation. It's founded in 1792. And the president of this corporation was Philip Schuyler, who was Hamilton's father-in-law. Hamilton had married his daughter, Elizabeth Schuyler. You cannot separate out what Hamilton proposed with the report on the National Bank, the report on the public credit, the report on manufacturing. You cannot separate that out as financial and banking policy from these things. These things are the product of what was intended with the Hamiltonian policy. Now, the Society for the Establishment of Useful Manufacturers, as I said, it was established in 1791, and it was centered on a project to build a manufacturing city in northern New Jersey, which is now the city of Paterson, New Jersey. It wasn't called Paterson. There was nothing there then. There was no city. The city grew up around this project. And in fact, the city was named after the governor of New Jersey, who gave who gave a state charter, New Jersey state charter, to build the project. And they later named the city after the governor, as opposed to naming it after Hamilton. But the this was established as this Paterson Project in northern New Jersey was established as essentially it was, I mean, I don't know the best terms to use. I wouldn't call it, a test, a paradigm. I can't think of the exact proper word to use. But the idea was to create this was tied directly in to the national banking system, to government securities. The only people who were allowed to invest, you could only invest in the Society for the Establishment of Useful Manufacturers. The only money you could invest in there were U.S. government securities, which you could only get through the national banking system. So you're tying the whole banking system into investment in this project. Now, Hamilton, didn't make money off of this or anything like that. Hamilton actually never made money off of anything. He was not in very good shape in terms of his personal finances when he died. But this was established essentially as a prototype for what was intended. If you go to Paterson today, you'll see the waterfalls, and some of the old machines. They don't have the ones going back to the 18th century, but this Paterson Project, the Hamilton Project, existed, I think, into the early 20th century. And it was very active during the 19th century, and a lot of those buildings are still there. They have a big statue of Hamilton, but a lot of those buildings are still there, where they were doing textiles and machinery and this and that. And this was established as a manufacturing center, right? Now, and the idea was that the banking system and the credit system, which was established by Hamilton, the national banking system, was going to be integrated into fostering and promoting these kind of developments, with Paterson being only the first. But these kind of developments around the country for the most rapid possible industrial and technological advancement of the country, right? Now, the second thing is the Erie Canal Project, which was originally, the Erie Canal originally proposed decades earlier by a guy named Cadwalder, I think. What is his name? I always get his Cadwalader Colden, who was a friend of Benjamin Franklin's. He had talked about linking up with the Great Lakes way back in the 1720s. Nothing was done about it. The first actual proposal to build a canal to the Great Lakes was by Gouverneur Morris in 1777. He was the first one to make a proposal, but nothing was really done with it for a long time. He went up there and investigated it. Philip Schuyler went up there in 1783. George Washington toured the area and took notes on how you would go about building a canal and how you could improve the water up there and everything. And then finally, in 1792, this company was incorporated. Now, this was not a company that was designed to build an Erie Canal, but it was incorporated with the intention that that's where they were going, that their intention was to develop the water systems in northern New York, and then to build a canal, at some future date, to lay the possibility of a canal. In 1792, no one knew exactly how that was going to work, etc. But this was the beginning of the process, with Hamilton working with his father-in-law, Philip Schuyler, and with others, directly overseeing and promoting this project. Now, Wes, can I have the first slide? There's two slides I want to show you. We're not going to have a lot of slides. The big one. Yeah, that one. Now, look, for those who think the Erie Canal, what is a big deal? A canal. Okay, we have lots of canals, right? Here's the map of this Great Lakes area, right?
Yeah.
People can see this. Here's the Hudson River, right? Now, you have to realize that in those days, the Great Lakes were essentially landlocked, right? That doesn't mean there wasn't an outlet to the water, but there was no navigable outlet. Can you go to the next slide? And then we're going to go back to this one. These are the Great Lakes. This is where they run off to, the St. Lawrence River, right? Now, the problem, there's two problems for the colonies, or for the United States, the new United States of America. One is the St. Lawrence River runs entirely through Canada, so it's in British hands. But that's not even the biggest problem. The biggest problem is the St. Lawrence River is not navigable, and did not become navigable until the 1950s when they built the St. Lawrence Seaway Project. There are rapids, there are waterfalls. Don't forget, when you go, well, I'll get back to that in a minute, but you cannot sail up until the 1950s, you could not sail ships down the St. Lawrence River into the Great Lakes. Could not be done, right? At all. So essentially, you have these Great Lakes here, but the only way to get to them, just before the railroads, was by horse and wagon, right? Now, can you go back? Go back to the first one. Yeah. Now, by building a canal over to the Great Lakes, you create a waterway from New York City, and look where it goes. Look where it goes. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan. You got Detroit, you got Chicago, Wisconsin, Minnesota, you're reaching out into the center of the country by water, right? This is what the Erie Canal did. This is what it did. Profound development of the future potentialities for the country, right? This is not some small little thing, right? Now, originally by the, when you get towards 1800 or something, when they really start to think about in the late 1790s, in the 1790s when Washington was president and then Adams, is originally when they started to actually talk about maybe we could build a canal, they talked about building it to Lake Ontario because that was the shortest route and it was also, I guess, the flattest or it was the easiest to deal with. The problem with building it to Lake Ontario is then what you've got is a water route to Lake Ontario. You can't get from Lake Ontario into Lake Erie. At least you couldn't then. There's a little thing here called Niagara Falls. Now they have ways to get around Niagara Falls. They didn't then. So you could sail boats into Lake Ontario, and that would be nice, but that's all you would get. You're still in New York State. In 1800, Gouverneur Morris once again proposed, why don't we build it to Lake Erie? Why don't we bypass it? And it was a much more difficult route. It was longer. It would have required more locks. It was a much more difficult route. But by building it to Lake Erie, then you can get everywhere. Then you can get everywhere. And this is what they did. I want to talk a little bit about the Erie Canal because it's such a profound development. In 1807, the New York State Legislature, this is long after Hamilton and Washington, but in 1807, the New York State Legislature adopted the Erie Canal project, decided to build it. In 1809, they set up an Erie Canal Commission. The chairman of it was Gouverneur Morris. The vice chairman was DeWitt Clinton. And DeWitt Clinton came on board to this canal project, somewhat later. I mean, he came on in like 1808, 1809, 1810. So he was, people around Hamilton, Schuyler, Morris, they were promoting it in the 1790s. DeWitt Clinton came on board later on, which is not to take anything away from him, because particularly after 1815, it was DeWitt Clinton who made sure the thing got built. But they established a canal commission in 1809 with Morris and DeWitt Clinton. Morris and DeWitt Clinton went down to Washington, D.C., and they had a meeting with President James Madison. And they laid out this project to build the canal to Lake Erie. They laid it out, what it would cost, how it could be done, and they asked for the federal government to become part of this project for federal financing, to make this part of a national policy. And Madison refused. He said it was unconstitutional for the federal government to get involved in these kind of projects. That the federal government had no business doing these kind of things. Now you compare that with what Hamilton's intention was with the Society for Useful Manufacturers, which is that it is entirely the business of the government, entirely the business of our national leaders to help direct the energies of the country in such a way that things like this could be built, that we could move in these kind of directions. But Madison said, nope, can't do it. And then, these guys continued to fight. I'm not going to go through all the details. Clinton got elected governor and then got voted out and then got elected again and got voted out and got elected again. There was a huge fight. During the War of 1812, the Erie Canal project was almost killed. It was essentially dropped during the War of 1812 for about 3 years. But then it was revived in 1815 when Clinton and Gouverneur Morris organized a big town hall meeting in New York City. They organized a big town hall meeting in New York City to revive interest in building the canal, because none of it had been built yet. It was still just a proposal. And they held a big town hall meeting in New York City. Morris died the next year in 1816, at which point Clinton became the leading advocate. There were other people involved: Robert Fulton, guy who developed the steamboat, Robert Livingston, but Clinton was the key mover. And beginning in 1816, he launched an all-out, relentless political fight to build the canal. I won't go through all the details, the ups and downs of it, but this took 8 years. From 1816 to 1824, he fought and fought and fought to get this canal built. And finally, in 1824, it was complete. And there was a boat named the Seneca Chief. And what they did was they left from Lake Erie. They got a barrel of Lake Erie water, and they sailed the Seneca Chief across the canal, down the Hudson to New York Harbor, and they emptied the barrel of Lake Erie water into the Atlantic Ocean and called it the Marriage of the Waters. And that was in 1824. This is a credit policy in action. This is what it means, right? And frankly, the only reason why they were able to do this after 1816 was because coming out of the, during the presidencies of Jefferson and Madison, every time they tried to approach the federal government, Morris or Clinton or others they were working with, every time they tried to approach the federal government about building the Erie Canal, while Jefferson was president and while Madison was president, these guys were not interested. They said, we don't want to do it. This is unconstitutional. But coming out of the War of 1812, when you have sort of a second generation of American nationalists, with people like Matthew Carey and Nicholas Biddle and others, you have the establishment of the Second National Bank of the United States in 1816. There is a renewed interest, a renewed commitment to this kind of a credit policy. And a revived nationalism, a revived anti-imperial, anti-British sentiment, a commitment for the physical development of the nation. People like Henry Clay in Kentucky and people moving into the Midwest and these becoming states, the physical development of the United States, and they managed to push this thing forward and get it built. So, as I said, this is, if you look at Hamilton's 4 reports, if you look at the banking system he set up, and you cannot separate it from the SEUM or the Erie Canal Project. Because the purpose of the banking system, the purpose of the credit system, which he was establishing, was to foster these kind of physical economic developments in the nation. Now, needless to say, there was a lot of opposition. We'll go into that, but let me, I know I said we'll wait till the end, but I don't want to keep going through this like a locomotive because people are going to sort of space out, I think. So while I take a breath and drink a little coffee, are there any questions up to this point? Yeah.
Just wondering about this project, the Erie Canal, which I read about 2 years. There was some kind of national money was gold and like
Private investment and state money from the state of New York.
physical money.
What?
Any kind of physical money, like a coin of some sort.
No, well, what do you mean?
I mean,
I mean, what kind of money did they have then?
Yes.
Oh, they largely coins. Largely coins. There was no national. There was nothing like, you know, a national circulating currency like paper money. Under the first and second national bank, there were what were called national banknotes, and for instance, if you deposited coin or gold or specie in the national bank, you would get national banknotes. If you borrowed money from the national bank to invest in something like this, and in fact, all of the money invested in the Society for the Establishment of Use, the Paterson Project, all that money had to be national banknotes or national securities. That's the only thing they would take. And national banknotes were paper. And they were issued as paper, and they were legal tender.
What's your backing?
Yeah, they were backed by the National Bank, and they were backed. The National Bank was essentially a vehicle of the Treasury Department. It was set up.
Oh, so right, backing.
To the currency.
Yes.
Yeah, there was. It wasn't. You know, the United States was not officially part of the British gold standard. The British gold standard didn't even come in until later, after the Napoleonic Wars. But in general, you know, you had gold and, you know, money was valued in terms of its weight in gold and silver. You know, I mean, in general.
It's before they call it constitutional money came later.
Well, you know, the first time that the United States, a lot of the colonies issued paper money, and during the Revolutionary War, the Constitutional Congress, during the Revolutionary War, it issued paper money. They called them continentals, you know. But after the Revolutionary War, both under the Articles of Confederation and then most definitely after the Constitution was adopted, there was no actual national paper money until Abraham Lincoln, the greenbacks. There were banknotes, and banknotes were in fact legal tender, and they were in fact money, and they were paper, but they not everybody had them. I mean, in other words, if you were going to invest in loan money out for something like this, you know, you could do it with banknotes drawn on the National Bank or one of the branches of the National Bank. But your average Joe Blow walking around on the street who's got like 50 cents in his pocket, he doesn't have any banknotes. It's coins, you know. So the majority of people used coins. Right?
Silver or gold.
Yeah, silver, gold, something like that. And that was done through the U.S. Mint under the Treasury Department, right? Now later under Andrew Jackson, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but under Andrew Jackson, you got, when he set up this state banking system, you had all these state banks all over the United States that were issuing paper money left and right and all this stuff in the 1830s. This was a completely insane system, and it led towards total financial ruin for the country. The thing about the national banking system is the national bank as envisioned. Look, let me make one warning here. I keep, you know, people might think I'm a little repetitive. I've been accused of that. But the reason why I keep saying this and this, this and this, is people have a tendency to discuss this in terms of money. What kind of money? How did they print their money? You know, what were their reserve requirements? You know, did the Treasury put the money in the bank? Did the Treasury loan money to the National Bank, or the National Bank sell stock? People tend to think of it in terms of money. The only reason that you would think about it that way is because you've been brainwashed over the last 30 to 40 years to think about everything that way. I tell you, that was not how they thought about it. Their idea was to try to set up a system and realize that a lot of this was trial and error. And I won't go into details here with you. But there were people very, very close to, I said there was this group of nationalists around Washington who were personally very close, very loyal to Washington, and who remained in, the closest of political allies for years. Some of them didn't agree with the National Bank. They thought it was a bad idea. They had a lot of different views. People know the famous quote when Benjamin Franklin, or some people probably know, when Benjamin Franklin came out of the Constitutional Convention and someone said, Mr. Franklin, what have you given us? And he said, a republic if you can keep it, right? There's another quote from Franklin in which he says that, I find a lot of flaws in this, Constitution, but I've learned living as long as I have that I make mistakes all the time, and maybe what I think are flaws are not really flaws. I could tell you, we think of the Constitution as sort of a holy document, and it is, in a way. It represents the intent of the United States. But there was not a single delegate, not one, who came out of the Constitutional Convention who was really happy with the final document. They all had problems with it. But what they said is, we've got to, we're going to put something together here which will head us in the right direction, right? And for instance, Hamilton, there were, when the Constitutional Convention happened, there were, a lot of people had different ideas. A lot of people had amendments and proposals, do this, do that. But there were 3 or 4 actual comprehensive plans that were introduced for a constitution. Virginia introduced a plan. Connecticut introduced a plan. Hamilton introduced his own plan. His own plan. He wrote out an entire constitution for the government, and he introduced it as a proposal. Every single one of his proposals was rejected. All of them. Not one. He didn't get anything, right? After the convention, if it were not for Hamilton, the Constitution would not have been ratified. He led the fight for ratification because he wasn't going to go and pout somewhere saying, I didn't get my way, He knew that this was the only hope, right? And they had to make it work. And then what he did with the national banking system and the credit system was to establish a system which could essentially harness the government to move it in the direction of the general welfare and the posterity in the future and the economic development of the country, right? So what I would just recommend to you is don't get hung up on money. Look, it's what I said before, there's no formula. Before Lincoln issued the greenbacks, there was no paper currency in the United States. And almost all of these guys, Ben Franklin liked paper currency. He wrote proposals for paper currency. George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, Gouverneur Morris hated paper currency. They were explicit that we should not have a paper currency. Now, does that mean they were wrong and Lincoln was right? No. It means that they lived in the 1790s and Lincoln lived in the 1860s, and the entire circumstance of the nation had changed, right? So you have to look at the intent. So anyway, look, we took one question. That's it. So back to the presentation.
Wes has been trying to get a question.
Oh, all right.
Oh, well, I was just gonna ask if the Erie Canal,
Huh?
1850, you said they built the St. Louis Seaway in 1950. Was the Erie Canal in existence all the way up until 1950, or
Erie Canal is still in existence.
it still functions?
No, it doesn't function anymore. It's a tourist attraction.
Was it still operational until?
Yeah, I think it's what happened with a lot of these canals is a lot of these canals, I mean, don't forget, this is not like the Panama Canal or Suez Canal where you're going through a continent and you're cutting thousands of miles off of ship transit or something. These are inland canals. And most of these canals serve a vital and powerful function in increasing the economic productivity of the nation for a period of time. Most of them essentially fell into disuse after the development of the railroads. The railroads really replaced them. You know, they still existed, they had some stuff, but if you look at the tonnage they carried,
Yeah.
By the 18, but it starts dropping by the 1840s. And after the Civil War, by the 1870s, forget it. The tonnage is a fraction of what it had been. Because the railroads just, canal traffic is cheap and it's faster than horses, but, you could move, something that would take you a month to move by canal. They could move in a day or two by railroad. So it just, these things had their era, shall we say, these inland river canals and stuff. But it is the case that, once if you look at the 1830s, 1840s, I have the figures, but I don't have them with me. The tonnage being moved through the Erie Canal, was immense. Thousands and thousands of tons of material being moved through the Erie Canal, opening up the entire Midwest. All right, so look, Wall Street. Look, Wall Street, it's not that these kind of oligarchical practices, monetarist, imperial financial practices originated in Wall Street. They didn't. They go back. London, Amsterdam, further, but the creation of Wall Street in the United States was brought about explicitly to battle what Hamilton and his allies were doing. And I mean that. And anyone who hears the story that Alexander Hamilton was a banker and he was for the rich and really
The monarch is
well, he wasn't soft on monarchy, in fact, but that he was rich. He was that he was a banker. That Wall Street is the creation of Alexander Hamilton. What I'm about to tell you is not my opinion. What I'm about to tell you is absolute truth. That when someone tells you that Alexander Hamilton is the creator of Wall Street, he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Nothing. Read a couple of articles on Wikipedia. Have no idea what the people who say that kind of thing have no idea what they are talking about. The fact is that, as I said, the 1790 and 1791, you have Hamilton's 4 reports. 1791 is the report on the National Bank, which I think is in the spring of 1791 when Hamilton releases that. A month after Hamilton releases his report on the National Bank, Thomas Jefferson writes a reply on the constitutionality of the National Bank, in which Thomas Jefferson says that a national bank would be unconstitutional and should not be allowed. Right? Now, this is the same Jefferson who was not particularly enthusiastic about the adoption of the U.S. Constitution. I've seen letters that he wrote. He was in Paris during the Constitutional Convention. He's the ambassador to France. And he writes back letters saying, this is going too far. I'm not so sure about this. Now, he didn't play an active role in fighting ratification. And later he claimed that he was really for it. But during the time, he was not a moving force in the adoption of the U.S. Constitution. And he writes a report in February, or in 1791, saying Hamilton's proposals are unconstitutional. He tries to pressure Washington. He has a meeting with Washington. He's Washington's Secretary of State. Tries to stop this thing. And then in January, in May of 1791, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson traveled to New York City. They traveled to New York City in May of 1971, and they meet with Aaron Burr. And that's the three of them. There's another guy, Robert Livingston, who's involved, but I'll leave him out of it because Robert Livingston is he's not an evil guy. He did a lot of good things. He just got mixed up in some bad things. He later became very important in getting the Erie Canal built. And he also was one of the most important people in getting the Constitution ratified in New York State. But he got mixed up with Jefferson and Burr. So in May of 71, Madison and Jefferson and Aaron Burr meet in New York City, in which they decide to launch an all-out attack to destroy Hamilton's new economic policies. They're going to prevent these from being brought into existence. One of the first things that Aaron Burr helps organize is a massive speculative attack against the Bank of the United States, because the Bank of the United States is a corporation. It has stock, right? It has stock. So they bid the stock up to over $300 a share. Then they pull the plug and the stock crashes to under $100 a share. And there's all this stuff. And the idea is to create panic, and to bring the Bank of the United States down, the national bank. This national bank that they had created was called the Bank of the United States. And they organized a speculative attack against it to bring the bank down. That's in July of 1791. Then 6 months later, in January of 1792, they launch another speculative attack, both against the Bank of the United States and also the Bank of New York, which is a bank created by Hamilton. This is carried out by two close friends of Aaron Burr's, a guy named Macomb and a guy named Dorr. And I won't go into the details of what they did, but there was massive financial speculation. They tried to essentially aim at trying to create a bubble in which they could crash the stocks of the Bank of the United States and the Bank of New York and drive them both out of existence. This was the period in which Hamilton issued a public attack on them, in which he said, this is a direct quote from Hamilton, saying, "'Tis time, there must be a line of separation between honest men and knaves, between stockholders and unprincipled gamblers." So, this is Hamilton making the point. Financial speculation and gambling is not the same as investment into the economy. Now, both of these attacks ultimately failed. Actually, both Macomb and Dorr ended up in debtor's prison. But it continued. The attacks continued. In 1799, you had the founding of the Manhattan Bank, which later became Chase Manhattan Bank, which later became J.P. Morgan Chase, and it still exists to this day. The sort of the evil, spawn, or mutation. But they have its founding in Manhattan Bank, which was founded in 1799 by Aaron Burr. And the purpose of Aaron Burr founding this bank in 1799 is to, again, try to carry out attacks against Hamilton's Bank of New York, try to carry out attacks against the Bank of the United States, and also to serve as a vehicle through which various kinds of extremely profitable financial speculation could be carried out. And there's all kinds of things they were involved in, including this water project in which they said they were going to build a water project, but really they never built anything. They just sold stocks and pocketed the money and all this kind of stuff. It's not worth going into. But this was founded in 1799. Then what you have even before that, in 1792, you have a group of Wall Street traders who held a meeting in Lower Manhattan, actually on Wall Street, at a place called Corey's Hotel. And they drew up articles of whatever organization, and they established a club. 2 months later, they officially incorporated the club. They turned it into a corporation. And there were 24 of them. And they met at 68 Wall Street and formed a group which would be engaged day to day in financial speculation. They called it the Tontine Group. Tontine, T-O-N-T-I-N-E. This was in 1792. This includes Leonard Bleecker and a bunch of other people. That group, the Tontine Group, 28 years later, in 1820, changed its name from the Tontine Group to the New York Stock Exchange, right? That's where it came from. These were all people allied with Burr, with the financial speculators. These were the enemies of Hamilton. This was Hamilton's intent. The Society for Useful Manufacturing, the Erie Canal, the physical transformation of the country. This was the intent of Hamilton, Morris, and others with the preamble to the U.S. Constitution. Create a nation promote the general welfare of for ourselves and our posterity into the future. This is a credit system in which the resources of the nation. Now, look. Well, let me put it this way: what is credit? What's the difference between credit and money? Money is just a thing. You know, I don't care if it's coin. I don't care if it's paper. It's just a thing. Has no value unless the government gives it value. You realize gold has no value. Silver has no value. People say, well, we got to get rid of this paper money, fiat money, go back to coins. Well, first of all, you think that you're insane, because what are you going to do? Have people go around spending hundreds of millions of dollars on coins? You know, I mean, let's get real here. But secondly, coins have no more value than paper. Who says an ounce of gold is worth so much money? Who says coins are worth so much money? Who says $1 is worth $1? The government says it. Money is a creation of government. Money does not exist in and of itself. The money is a creation of a nation state, but if you just think about money, it's a dead thing. Okay, I got a piece of paper here. It's just paper. It's dead. It's not even alive. It was alive once, I guess. It was a tree, but it's dead. If I lay it here, will it produce more paper? Will it have little children papers? Will it produce more wealth? It's nothing. And a money system, as Aaron Burr was involved in, as the creators of the New York Stock Exchange were involved in, as the system which dominates the world today, the banking system, the financial system, Wall Street, is all about taking these dead pieces of paper, and now it's not even paper anymore, it's just all on computers, taking these dead things and manipulating them in such a way that you increase the amount you have, which means you could buy more. You can own more things. Now, is that going to guarantee a future for your grandchildren or great-grandchildren? Is that going to guarantee a future for the human race? Is that going to get us anywhere? Is that going to get the nation or our species anywhere? A credit system is designed, the reason I started with this thing about fire and discovery and the noetic quality of the human species may seem strange at the time. There was a reason for it. Credit system is based on that quality, where the government, as representatives of the people, not as our enemy. People tend to think of the government as our enemy these days because we've had a lot of bad people in our government. But where our nation, our republic, as intended in 1788, acts in such a way that we are defining a future. It is future-oriented, not day-to-day pleasure. Future-oriented. And it relies on investments in science, technology, such as what LaRouche talks about, the fusion driver program, or the other thing which we have talked a lot about, the Chinese space program, the most advanced concepts in science and technology, which will create unlimited capabilities and possibilities for human species. That's a credit system. That's a credit system. It's not based on a formula about what you do with the money. It's not a formula. It's an entirely different way of thinking about things. Right? Now, let's see here. I've been talking for a long time. I think I'll bring this to a close, but I want to end in a certain kind of way. Well, and just in terms of the current system, before I get to the end part, briefly on the current system, Mike went through this in his presentation. We've certainly covered this extensively. We're facing a profound crisis right now, in which the bankruptcy of this speculative gambling system, this financial system, is leading us to the precipice of war. Now, this is the question of the bricks. You know, my presentation was supposed to be on Hamilton, the bricks, and changing what you think, and I haven't even mentioned the bricks, because it doesn't need to be mentioned, really. Mike went through it. You know, look, if you think about what they're doing, a canal through Nicaragua, a second Suez Canal, the European land bridge, the new Silk Road, nuclear power development, new technologies, the Chinese space program, you know, everything they're doing. There's two things you could say about it. One is that it's all future-oriented, transforming the physical economy of the world in a way which will make our species more productive and create a happier future for human beings, for all of us. More opportunity, better economy. This is what they're doing. And the other thing they're doing is that this is based on mutual cooperation. This is another way people have been brainwashed. The idea that, you know, we're all out for ourselves. We've had people at these meetings say this. You know, I have to get money because if I don't get money, someone else is going to get the money. We're all in a struggle for the money. Dog eat dog, rat race. You know, you're battling it out in the free marketplace. This is like, you know, the dream world of Ayn Rand. You know, and people have that same view about nations. If China is building their space program, or China's building nuclear reactors, or, you know, if they're doing this stuff, they must be out to get us. You know, that's an oligarchical way of thinking. What they're out to do is to move the world in the direction that we were moving in 1788, 1789. We've been taken over. We've been taken over by the British financial empire. Wall Street is the enemy of our nation. It's the enemy of the United States. And it's the enemy of everyone in this room. And you may have money and, you know, Who knows? Stocks or investments where you're making a good return. Well, first of all, I don't think it's going to last too much longer. But secondly, I don't care if you're making money. People often say to me, or people used to say to me, you lay out that we're heading into a financial crash. And they'd say, what should I do with my money? I couldn't care less. I really don't care if you lose all your money, because it's all based on an insane system. The idea that you finance your life through speculation is insane. And the country was never run that way before the last 30 to 40 years. It's insane. If you have this kind of a system, you have increases in physical productivity, which enrich your entire nation. That's what we have to get back to, right? And if we don't get back to that, maybe I was a little harsh saying I don't care if you lose all your money, because the fact is, when this financial system comes crashing down, you're going to lose it whether I want you to or not. It's all going to come crashing down. So look, I hope some of this made sense. I try to fit a number of different things in here, and there's a lot more that could be said about all of it. This has been a war since the creation of the United States. Now, what I want to end with is something on Hamilton. Is Wes here? I need that last picture. The answer to this fourth question, in case anyone can't guess from everything I've said up to this point, the answer is no. We do not need it. We do not need the New York Stock Exchange. We do not need J.P. Morgan Chase. We do not need the the rest of these institutions. We don't need any of it. In the 17th century, in Massachusetts, when they were building the Saugus Iron Works and the first public school system in the colonies under the Winthrops and the Mathers, and they had a standard of living massively higher than the standard of living in England at the time. They didn't have a stock exchange. They didn't have privately owned banks. They had the Pine Tree Shilling, which was issued by the government of Massachusetts, and which funded projects like the Saugus Iron Works. So anyway, go to the last picture. That one, yeah. All right. I'm going to end this with some things which might upset some people, but I think it's fitting and maybe necessary. But this picture I'm just putting up is to give you a sense of what Hamilton did. Look, these people didn't just write banking laws and things like that. These were heroes. These were great people. And in 1788, when they were fighting for ratification of the U.S. Constitution, I said there was a convention in Poughkeepsie, New York. The Constitution had been signed in Philadelphia the previous year, but it had to be ratified by the states. And they were fighting to get it ratified in New York, and they were losing. They were in the minority. It didn't look like it was going to get ratified. What they organized was a gigantic march through Manhattan. A gigantic march. They had bakers and sailors and what do you call it, blacksmiths and all kinds of people, and like a St. Patrick's Day parade, this huge march. And right in the middle of the march, what they did, this actually happened. They took a ship, not a model of a ship, a real ship, and they put it on a float, and it's got wheels underneath and horses. And they called it the Federal Ship Hamilton. And they put banners around it to hide the wheels. So it looked like it was floating, you know, like sailing. And they pulled it through the streets of Manhattan. And every so often, they would shoot cannon off. And this was the Federal Ship Hamilton, you know, arriving in Manhattan to bring the people the Constitution of the United States. And it was shortly after that the Constitution got voted up. But this is a real thing. And look, it should be, I didn't mention this. You know, we've talked to people here about what we call our Manhattan Project, And I don't know if everyone here has been to New York City, and people have different views on New York City. But the fact is, we have a big country. There's a lot of, everyone in the country is a valuable person. All parts of the country are valuable parts of the country. But New York City, and particularly Manhattan, you have to realize, has been the front lines of the battleground against our enemies since the beginning. The ratification of the Constitution. I gave you a very, very, very brief synopsis, and really, you know, very brief synopsis of the creation of the stock exchange, what Aaron Burr was doing, the attacks on the National Bank. You have the assassination of Hamilton by Burr in 1804. You know, who actually 5 years earlier had also fought a duel with Hamilton's nephew and tried to kill him. You have this ongoing battle in New York. When Abraham Lincoln ran for president, he came to New York and gave his famous Cooper Union speech, you know, which is really the speech that got him the presidency in New York. You have Lincoln's battle with Wall Street during the Civil War, where the Wall Street banks tried to bankrupt his government, and he issued the greenbacks and said, we're going to have sovereign currency. We're going to set up a national credit system and develop this country, build a transcontinental railroad, develop our citizenry, free the slaves. He was fighting Wall Street. Franklin Roosevelt, in his first inaugural speech, if you don't believe me, it's on YouTube. His first inaugural speech in 1933, he says, we're going to overturn the economic royalists of Wall Street. That's what he says. This has been the front line of the battle of our republic for 200 years. And it's the front line today. It's not just, you know, that, well, we like Manhattan, you know. No. This is where the enemy is. And this is where Hamilton went. This is where other people went. They went to New York to battle the enemy, because that's where the British fifth column is. That's where the financial empire has its base in the United States. It's in lower Manhattan. And they went there to fight it. So, look, what I said I was going to bookend this with some things with quotes from Gouverneur Morris, who was maybe Hamilton's closest friend. I don't know, personal friend. They were very, very close personal friends. He was certainly Hamilton's closest political ally. Particularly once Washington was dead. I'm going to end with two different things from Gouverneur Morris. The first is July 9th, 1804, which is when Gouverneur Morris learns that Hamilton has been shot by Aaron Burr. And he, 2 days later, writes in his diary. He kept a diary. And he writes, July 9th, I go to town and meet opposite the hospital Martin Wilkins, who tells me General Hamilton is yet alive at Greenwich Street and not, as I was told this morning, already dead. I go there. When I arrive, Hamilton is speechless. The scene is too powerful for me, so that I am obliged to walk in the garden to take breath. And having composed myself, I return and sit by Hamilton's side till he expires. He is opened up, and we find that the bullet, it's actually the ball, we're on balls, that the ball has broken one of his ribs, passed through the lower part of the liver, and lodged in the vertebrae of his back. A most melancholy scene. His wife almost frantic with grief, his children in tears, every person deeply afflicted, the whole city agitated, every countenance dejected. This evening, I am asked to pronounce a funeral oration. I promise to do so if I can possibly command myself enough, but express my belief that it will be utterly impossible. I am wholly unmanned by this day's events. So that's from his diary on the death of Hamilton. And then it was Gouverneur Morris who gave the eulogy, the funeral oration at Hamilton's funeral on July 11th. And this is a quote. This is not the entire eulogy, but these are excerpts from his eulogy. He says, if on this sad, this solemn occasion, I should endeavor to move your commiseration, it would be doing injustice to that sensibility which has been so generally and so justly manifested. Far from attempting to excite your emotions, I must try to repress my own. And yet I fear that instead of the language of a public speaker, you will hear only the lamentations of a bewailing friend. But I will struggle with my bursting heart to portray that heroic spirit which has flown to the mansion of bliss. Brethren of the Cincinnati, there lies our chief. Let him still be our model. Like him, after a long and faithful public service, let us cheerfully perform the social duties and private life. Oh, he was mild and gentle. In him there was no offense, no guile. His generous hand and heart were open to all. Fellow citizens, you have long witnessed his professional conduct and felt his unrivaled eloquence. You know how well he performed the duties of a citizen. You know that he never courted your favor by adulation or the sacrifice of his own judgment. You have seen him contending against you and saving your dearest interests, as it were, in spite of yourselves. And you now feel and enjoy the benefits resulting from the firm energy of his conduct. Bear this testimony to the memory of my departed friend. I charge you to protect his fame. It is all he has left, all that these poor orphan children will inherit from their father. But my countrymen, that fame may be a rich treasure to you also. Let it be the test by which to examine those who solicit your favor. Disregarding their professions, view their conduct, and on a doubtful occasion, ask yourself, would Hamilton have done this thing? So that's what I'm going to read. So these were heroes. You know, this was a war. This was a war for the future. That's what they were fighting. And that's what we're fighting today. So I will stop there and we'll open it up. Yeah.
Isn't a statue of Hamilton on Wall Street?
I think there is.
And is that to kind of fool us to think that?
Oh yeah, they tried to claim Hamilton as one of their own. You know, he was there. I mean, you'll hear people, you know, some of these neocons, some of these, you know, people. I mean, you know, some of these people talk about Hamilton as like, yeah, you hear someone like, I don't know, some of these guys. I can't even think of their names. You know, Kraudheimer and some of these idiots who will talk about Hamilton as, you know, they're sort of the father of American conservative, the American conservative movement or something. It's just, I mean, it's lies. It's also people of, some of these people who claim this kind of stuff are people of mediocre intellectual capabilities who really don't know what they're talking about. You know? You know? You know, you find that all the time. You know, you find that all the time. I mean, this idea that Hamilton and Washington and these people were for the rich, and Jefferson and Tom Paine and these people were for the poor and the working man. I mean, it's just nothing. There's not a shred of truth in any of that. You know? I mean, they weren't all good and all bad. But what you had was a very clear, very scientific, very precise understanding about the creation of a republic and the purpose of that republic, the intent of it, what it was you were trying to do. Profoundly different from an oligarchical system, right? And that's what they were doing, you know? And Wall Street has existed in our midst as a colony, a spore, a parasite of the financial empire for 200 years. People who don't know the history, the story of the Lincoln administration, Lincoln's battle with Wall Street. Intense. So anyway, yeah, there is a statue of Washington. I mean, of Hamilton. I think there is. I haven't been on Wall Street in a long time, but I think you're right.
I thought I saw it in the little video clip of the
Yeah.
Manhattan Project.
Yeah. Wouldn't surprise me. But then again, you know, you'd have to look at who put the statue up. The fact that the statue is there, and the fact that these guys can all claim Hamilton was our godfather, Hamilton was people who created modern Wall Street, the fact that they could say that today doesn't mean that that's why the statue was put up. Maybe someone good put up the statue, stuck it on Wall Street to say, I'm still here. You know, you're not getting rid of me. You know, so I don't know. You know, you have to look into that. Yeah.
How old was Hamilton at this time?
When he died?
Yeah.
Well, he was about 20, I think, in 1776, give or take a couple of years. He was young, 1775, 1776, maybe 20, 21 years old. So when he died, maybe 50. Maybe I don't know, somewhere between 45 and 55, you know?
I got the impression in their lecture, you didn't say it, but this is just the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. Small businesses and people were very rowdy.
People were what?
Rowdy.
Rowdy?
Yes, that picture says it right there.
Yeah, they were pretty rowdy.
They're strong-willed and had convictions.
Yeah. Well, look, they're out here fighting for the adoption of the U.S. Constitution. Compare that to what people demonstrate for today. You know, I mean, it used to be in the 60s, you could at least get people out in the streets demonstrating against the Vietnam War, whether you're for or against the war, but at least it was political. Now, the only way you get people out in the streets is if you got naked bodies or free beer or something like that, you know? It's bad. So yeah, the only point I would make, and this will have to be at a future date you want to have more discussion on it, is the Industrial Revolution isn't something that just happened. And in fact, what these guys were fostering were industry, science, and technology. And if you go back even earlier, you know, people say that the Industrial Revolution started in England. But what is actually the case, and Tony Chaikin, who is one of our members and lifelong historian, has written on this. If you go back into the, even earlier than this, into the 1740s, 1750s, most of the people who started the Industrial Revolution in England were close friends and associates of Benjamin Franklin. It was Franklin who went over to England. Franklin, who had been experimenting with electricity. Franklin was not some tinkerer, you know? He was a scientist. And Franklin, who had been working with electricity and different kinds of mechanics, he spent a good chunk of his adult life in England. You know, he was over there in the 50s and 60s representing the colonies, you know, against the stamp tax and all this stuff. And he had a group of people around him, you know, a fairly broad group. And if you look at a lot of the original industrial enterprises that were started in England, they were started by these friends of Hamilton, and Hamilton was actually involved in this. So this was not, you know, look, scientific progress and industrial progress is not automatic. I mean, the idea that history just happens, you know, it's like kind of like Karl Marx, you know, the stages of history, although people can also think of it any way they want. You don't have to be a Marxist, but they're like, well, things just happen, you know? You know, but the idea that, you know, well, we used to be farmers, and then we developed manufacturing, and then we did this and that, and now, you know, nothing just happens. There's no natural progression. Empires have risen and fallen throughout U.S. history. You say, well, we always have, yeah, but we always have scientific progress. That's not true either. We've gone through dark ages. We've gone through thousands of years of the population being driven backwards. You know, scientific progress, technological progress, exploration of the universe. I mean, think back to the Stone Age and to the Paleolithic, when people began to actually look at the stars and begin to discern constellations, and then realize with these constellations you could actually navigate boats, or you could, you know, and things like this. These are human discoveries, and this is deliberate. Scientific progress is deliberate. You realize the Chinese space program right now, they're going back to the moon. They're going to build a new space station. They're recruiting other countries to join with them. They want to actually sort of transform the Chinese space program into a BRICS space program. They want to bring in Russia and India and Brazil and South Africa and other countries. But if they weren't doing that, this is based on conscious, deliberate decisions and investment policy of the Chinese government. If they weren't doing it, it wouldn't be going on. It doesn't just happen by itself. It's not just inevitable. Is it inevitable that we're going to go out to the moon and out to other planets? No, that's not inevitable. If we have a thermonuclear war, it's not going to happen at all. You know? So nothing is inevitable. These are conscious. And the Industrial Revolution is often presented as sort of, it was just an evolutionary stage of human development, as opposed to the fact that it was a voluntaristic, deliberate intention to move society in that direction.
It was unplanned.
What?
It was unplanned. They're just inventing this on the citizens. They were adventurous.
Well, yeah, look, you have to have what you want to do with something like this. It's like you get in some phony argument. Should you're talking about socialism, should the government run in everything, or should you have free enterprise? Whatever. It's an idiotic argument. What you want to do is you want to have a situation through, and this is the idea of a credit system, in which you're moving your society and your economy in this direction. You're not letting bankers and speculators take trillions and trillions of dollars and pour them into gambling in Las Vegas and things like that. But you're moving society in a way which is going to create greater productivity and opportunity. Within that, you have individual initiative. You have, people tinkering in their garage who say, "Eureka, I discovered something." Sure, that's how it works. And people don't realize, like, for instance, when you had a space program under Kennedy, the Apollo program and all that, we were spending all this money to go up into outer space, and this was all government money. But it's a big government program. Most people have no idea that as a result of that space program, tens and tens of thousands of small, privately owned, high-tech firms were created. Electronics, machine tools, computers, this and that, who got contracts to build parts, to build things, to research certain things. And this is all, guys who had ideas. Hey, I could build this better, and you want a government that's going to encourage those kind of things. It's going to encourage that kind of initiative, So anyway, other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, how many times in history prior to this, this type of system to run a government or to be government, how many times was it written?
I've just been tried before.
Yeah, I know there were philosophers that said, well, this is how it's probably.
No, not really. Nothing like the United States. I'm not an expert on all these countries. There have been great periods in human history, many of which were not in Europe. Fact is that for at least 2,000 to 3,000 years, maybe longer, but for at least 2,000 to 3,000 years, it was China that led the human race in science, technology, human discovery. Europe did not really pass China in terms of science and technology and industry until the European Renaissance, until the 15th century. And even then, it didn't happen overnight. Even look, we didn't start using coal as a fuel really in any kind of major way until the 19th century. It was being used in the 18th century, and it had even toyed around with it a little bit before then, but it didn't amount to much. It was in limited use in the 18th century, and then it came into widespread use in the 19th century, burning coal to power things. Burning coal for fuel, burning coal to power steam engines, power machinery, iron production, right? Things like that. This is only this only happened around 1800. China's been doing it since like 500 BC as a universal source of fuel, right? So for many, there are periods of human history where there were great advances, and there were also obviously enlightened rulers and great culture. One thing that we're not going into today because you can't cover the entire history of the human race in all of its aspects, but what I'm not discussing here is this question of culture. Confucius in China, the question of certain people in the West, even Plato, and going back to ancient Greece, or much later in the Renaissance, with Nicholas of Cusa and Kepler and others, you have this question of culture, human culture, right? So there are great periods, and there are periods of great advance in human society. But in terms of this kind of a self-governing republic without an oligarchy, a self-governing republic organized constitutionally, not just because one enlightened ruler wants it. Like this is what happens sometimes in some of these places like China or even in Europe, you know, where you had a good ruler, right? Some guy would come in and say, okay, I'm going to build bridges, I'm going to build schools, I'm going to do this, and then he would die, and then his son would be a moron, you know. You know, but the idea here was to create a self-governing republic based on these principles, which could be perpetuated into the future. There was never a government like that in the world, as far as I know, until the United States. Never. Not of that form, with that intent, which is not simply the intent of one person, but is the constitutional intent of the nation itself. Right? So
we had the economics, you know, economics was only a science fairly recently, and then the American system of economics, not based on slavery or, you know, whatever, is a real science-driven, the science of economics-driven government that we can, economy that we can have.
yeah,
But we haven't had a science-driven economy saying that economics is a science. It was, prior to that, it was a monarchy or it was a
Right.
slave-based
Yeah, right.
economy.
Right.
It wasn't a science-based
right,
economy.
right.
So now we can have, I think this is maybe, as far as I know, the first time in history, in human history, that we have had a science-driven economy, or making efforts to have this.
Right. Good. No, you're right. So I would hope, you know, I said these are the 4 questions I wanted to put up, and I wanted the people to consider these questions from the standpoint that perhaps, maybe, when you answer them, you could possibly be wrong in some of your answers, and to try to ask people to rethink some of these things, because that's what I was trying to do here, and the you know, to get people to rethink some of this, how this works. I mean, look, this is what you get with some of these people in Congress. I'm not going to name any names because I don't know any of these people personally, and I don't know how good or bad they are, but I know at least some of them look upon Glass-Steagall, reimposing Glass-Steagall, as an economic reform, a banking reform, a banking reform. Well, if that's what you really think, then you have flunked question number 3. You know, it's not a banking reform. It's you know, it's a step towards the creation, a necessary precondition towards reestablishing a credit system in the United States. That's what it is. That's its crucial importance. Other questions, comments?
Is there a Glass-Steagall House bill?
Yes, yes, there is. I am afraid to say, I'm ashamed to say, I don't know the number of it. Is someone here? Oh, this is disgraceful. A room full of LaRouche organizers and nobody knows the number of the bill. Is it 381?
She said there's 2.
There are 2.
There are 2 House bills and 2 Senate bills
Yeah.
already.
Someone here can get you the numbers of those bills, the sponsors of those bills, and we certainly need people from the Bay Area and from California to sign on to them, to become sponsors, and to fight for them, as opposed to just sticking their name on a piece of paper, to actually get up and fight for it.
Has the LaRouchePAC group used Pop Box, are you familiar with Pop Box?
Popvox. I'm not familiar with Popvox.
So it's a great platform. Any House bill or Senate bill, you can voice your comments, and they get to your senator or your congressperson. And it's a way to, in my way of thinking, maybe a way that we can influence congressional people to get involved.
Yeah. I don't know if we're involved in that at all. I mean, since Elizabeth Warren is one of the sponsors of one of the Senate bills to bring back Glass-Steagall, and since Elizabeth Warren and a lot of her younger supporters are big Internet Information Society kind of people, I would be surprised if they weren't all over stuff like that. I really don't know. I don't know. You know, to tell you the truth.
It just seems like it's a free way to get people to express their opinion. And they say that it will get the air. They will verify you as a constituent, and they will get it to your representative.
Sounds like a good idea to me. I don't know. I'll try to find out. Yeah.
It makes it about either a question or a comment. And for years and years, I always often wondered about the stock market, the Wall Street. The whole economy is based on that. And then somebody from Hollywood, a movie star or singer or anybody says that you kind of call it stock go up or down and switch stocks a lot. And everything's based upon that, the stock market. And I thought it was a really good idea. It's too unstable.
Yeah, particularly with what's been done. I mean, you know, I said before, you know, we don't need the stock market. You know, I'm not an expert on the stock market. You certainly don't need what you have today.
Right.
And the stock market was created by all these enemies of Hamilton. Now, then the question is then how do you capitalize companies? You know, how would you go about doing that? I don't really know. So there are people who could figure that out. But what I do know is that the extent to which, look, we now have a situation that's completely out of control. Because the fact is, after Roosevelt came in, he didn't just put in Glass-Steagall. You know, they set up the Securities Exchange Commission. They set up quite a number of other things. You know, they had restrictions on. He outlawed options trading. Options trading was legal under Calvin Coolidge and Herbert Hoover. Roosevelt outlawed options trading. He almost outlawed futures trading. They outlawed all futures trading except for very limited agricultural futures, like on pork bellies. And even that was kept within certain restrictions. So almost all kinds of that kind of financial speculation was outlawed. They put restrictions on stocks. I mean, now I don't even, you know, I'm going to say things like, because I could be wrong about the specifics and I don't remember the specifics, but things like where if you buy a stock, you have to hold that stock for 3 months or 6 months before you can sell it. That the stock is seen as an investment in the company. You are buying the stock to help capitalize the company so that company can then turn around and carry out research and development or buy new plant and equipment or do something to improve itself as a company. You're not carrying out day trading, you know, where you're jumping from one stock to another, hold stocks for like 5 minutes or 3 minutes or 1 minute so that you can shave off, you know, interest rate profits. Right. That kind of stuff was all illegal, even in the 1950s and 60s. You realize that over 90% of the kind of things, that's why I was saying before, people who think, you know, the idea that, you know, you should finance your livelihood, you know, your livelihood. You know, the money you have to buy a house, the money you have to have your lifestyle, that you should finance your livelihood through speculative investments, right? Which is insane. And of course, a lot of people do it now, right? I mean, a lot of people, particularly a lot of these young people on Google and Twitter and Apple, they own all these stock options and all this nonsense. But one thing to keep in mind is that over 90%, and it could be more than 95%, I'm not even sure, but over 90% of the kind of things people invest in today, And I'm not just talking about these wild speculators offshore investing in derivatives and all that. That's all new. But I'm talking about the average person. Over 90% of the things the average person invests in today, it was illegal to invest in those things 30 or 40 years ago. And almost everything, 99% of what the big banks do was illegal 30 or 40 years ago. This stuff, they opened up the spigots. They deregulated everything. So, you know, there are ways in which, without abolishing the stock market, you could cut it down to size and you could regulate the hell out of it, such that it at least had some semblance of serving a useful purpose. I mean, you need corporations, right? You need corporations, and you need a way to finance those corporations and things like that. That's the whole point of public stock ownership. But that has no, you know, how that worked 100 years ago has no relationship with how the financial markets work today. It's just a gambling casino now.
Right, exactly. One probably was agricultural futures. When I hired on the phone company in 1966, one of my coworkers was into that. He bought egg futures, and he lost, and he had to take a whole freight carload of eggs. That happened. And then more recently, the stock market, GM on common shares, the price of common shares, that was the zero that people had that for all my investment in the stock market. They got from the government since the 80s, it's insurance program, and the company goes bankrupt, they get 6% of that, and then otherwise. Yeah, so that company, that backed up the stock owners of the stock market got zero on common shares.
Right.
I never invested in any stocks. I just got it.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's you know, it's a psycho ward, that's for sure. I don't know, what time is it? Oh, well, maybe we should wrap it up. I hope people got something out of it. That's what I got, okay?